Okay. Yeah, at the ECaRoM conference, it's good to see that so many people participate in the discussion about caring masculinities in early childhood education. And I also would like to say thank you in the beginning before I start my lecture. Thanks to all the partners in the ECaRoM project. We have a continuous cooperation. We already started in the Boys in Care project, so it was really a great cooperation. I would like to say thank you to my colleague in the Austrian team, Veronika Suppan. Thank you very much for all the work you've done in this project. And I want to say thank you to Elisabeth Zistler and Ben Dresnisser, who always support our projects. These are the Austrian co-funding organizations, and a very big applause for Virginia, Greta, Monica, and Margarita, who organized this event today. Thank you very much for that. So now my 30 minutes start. Okay. Yeah, I will, in the next 30 minutes, focus on the issue of boys' care and masculinities. And I will start with the context. So you already talked about this. I will also very briefly talk about it, about some major changes in the last decades concerning the gendered structure in European societies. So I brought the Gender Equality Index score. So we see in the Gender Equality Index score a big variation in European countries. For some countries who moved forward in the years 2005 to 2017, while others lag behind. So nevertheless, although we see this, this variation, this significant variation in European countries, we also see common grounds, we see common changes. And I would very briefly like to talk about it. The first major change in the last decades has been that while for a long time gender has been seen as a women's concern, men have been seen as neutral or normal. This gradually has changed in the last decades, and the issue of man, gender equality and care have been increasingly addressed also in, as you said, in gender equality policies on European level. So, and we see it with a growing recognition that women's employment, women's education, women's employment, and men's share of care are linked issues. This is, for example, reflected in leave regulations on European level, in improvement of leave regulations, which are based on non-transferable use it or lose it concepts. So we see it in the Scandinavian countries already for a long time. We see improvements in Iceland. We see improvements in Spain. So this is one major change, I would say. The second one is that the increase of the employment rate of women and far-reaching changes in the world of work, for example, the increased importance of the service sector, have had a major impact on gender relations as well, and have raised the need for new care arrangements. So typical allocations of care work to women have become fragile in modern European societies, as Heilmann and Scholz pointed it out 2017. Paid labor has become an overall norm independent from gender. So this raised the question of how the unpaid care work can be redistributed. How should we do this? The third change is that the changing economies influence men's prospect in secure long-term employment, as this cannot be put into practice any longer. So discontinuity and also insecure working patterns increasingly characterize man's working life too. And we know that Corona has reinforced these dynamics. And fourth, the European research, like, for example, the role of men in gender equality study in Europe showed that men increasingly participate in unpaid care work. This is one result. So we saw in the role of men study significant regional differences also in Europe, with higher share rates in the Scandinavian countries and lower rates in the Southern European countries. So we saw that the situation changes. We saw increasing men increasingly participate in unpaid care work, but when we look at the unpaid care on men and women's share in unpaid care work, from the EIGE study 2018 data on 2015, we see still gender care gap when it comes to unpaid care work. So especially in Austria, for example, we have an incredible high care gap here, also in Switzerland, Norway, and so on. So we see that some things change, and we see that some things change in slow motion, while others seem to not change at all. So we are confronted with persistent phenomena, such as the gender segregation on the labor market, and this project is also focusing on the gender segregation on the labor market. We are confronted with phenomena such as an incredible gender pay gap still in some countries, and this is connected to the gender pension gap and a still unequal division of paid and unpaid care work. And we also still see traditional power-based forms of masculinity developed in close relation with the growth-oriented capitalism. And we know that the capitalist systems are still linked to the idea of an autonomous but implicitly male subject outlined already in Connell's concept of hegemonic masculinity. So man's dominance is still obvious, and as colleague Joanne Ecker pointed it out already in the 90s, the whole capitalist system is based on the asymmetrical division of labor, the asymmetrical division of paid and unpaid work. So this is the context. This is the context in which we worked on this project. So, and this is also why we concentrate our research since many, many years on questions around caring masculinity in different fields of life and also in different age groups. So ECaRoM, this European project, concentrated on the work with the very young. With the very young children, on questions if aspects of caring masculinity are already addressed in the work with the very young, in kindergarten, in primary school. And before we now listen to the analysis results presented by our colleagues, before we look at the tools and materials that have been developed, in which we try to put a normative or theoretical concept into practice, I would briefly like to talk about boyhood, masculinity and care, about growing up under different circumstances, and what study results also on the qualitative level tell us about it. Okay, we start with the growing up topic with gender norms. So despite the variety of European societies characterized by low to high countries' overall advancement in gender equality and practices, we know that gender norms are still evident, and they are based on a gender binary system. So on a system that differentiates women and men, but not other genders. So norms are the basis for gendered expectations. They influence how people behave. They tell them what they should like and what they shouldn't like, how they should look like, and things like that. So gender norms restrict children and prevent them also from developing their interest and their abilities. So those who do not fit into the categories of boys and girls are often ignored, are often corrected, or suppressed. So gender expectations represent strong social attributions. Therefore, it is relevant to critically reflect these expectations and acknowledge the ways girls, boys, and also non-binary kids are perceived, that this way can be changed. Masculinity expectations come in here. Masculinity expectations are requirements that all those who are perceived or feel as boys have to deal with. Masculinity is traditionally associated with concepts such as as you know, rationality, authority, strength, potentiality, heterosexuality, defensiveness, and so on. This means that those who want or should be considered boys are best athletic, not too thick or too thin, popular with and interested in girls sexually and romantically, respected by boys or men, non-feminine, successful without excessive effort, not mentally or physically impaired, sexually potent, white, and so on and so on. This is what our colleague Thomas Viola-Rieske wrote 2018. So the fulfillment of this aspect is accompanied by a realistic expectation of enjoying high levels of power, recognition, and high levels of security. But it is also clear that a fulfillment of these social expectations includes the danger that male characteristics must be confirmed again and again, also in a destructive way. So being a man does not solely mean display a male body, but it also means taking a symbolic place as a real man. So the US psychologist Robert Brennan has found four principles that are the basis of what it means to be a man. According to hegemonic, powerful roles. We might not agree with these rules, but we know these rules. So one rule is be a sturdy oak, be solid, firm, whatever comes. Also in a crisis situation, be a rock. Don't be a human being. You don't have to be a human being. You don't have to be emotional. The second one is be a big wheel, be important, get rich, powerful, have big friends, measure your masculinity through competition. Second rule. Third rule, give them hell, go for it. Be daring, take risks, rather than respect your own well-being, rather than respect your own safety, your own health. And fourth, no sissy stuff, to under no condition, never appear feminine or appear gay. So these are four rules, and we can see dimensions in these rules which can be described as the so-called toxic side of masculinity. They are largely contaminated with fighting, with competition, with really huge effort, with unhealthy and sometimes unhappy ways of life, and also with violence against others and against themselves, actually. So toxic here means bad for others, but it means also bad for men themselves. So how do these dimensions influence boys? How does masculinity develop in boys? The social relations among men play an important role in forming pictures about masculinities and also help to explain boys and later also man's higher overall inclination to violent behavior. Michael Kimmel said once, guys hear the voices of the men in their lives, fathers, coaches, brothers, grandfathers, uncles, priests. So these ideas of masculinities from these men in their lives, they are transferred from generation to generation with a certain self-concept, or with a certain, a self-concept as a result, which was described as the Guy Code by Michael Kimmel. The Guy Code is a collection of attitudes, a collection of values, a collection of traits that compose an orientation patterns of what it means to be a man. And also results from boyhood study, and Gary Barker today in the afternoon will also talk about it. Very recent results from boyhood studies. They show that if we want to know more about the orientation pattern of masculinity, the influence of the peer group should not be neglected. So also Kimmel said, our peers are kind of a gender police, always waiting for us to screw up so they can give us a ticket for crossing the well-drawn boundaries of manhood. So the boy code and the guy code, they are related to the concept of hegemonic masculinity developed by Reuben Connell, an orientation pattern for men hard to reach but very efficient, and an orientation pattern that relates to the subordination of others, to the subordination of women, I would say to the subordination of other genders as well, and to the subordination of other men. And we have to address this because also among boys, we see this process of creation of a gender order it's an important characteristic of differentiation. But we also have to pay attention that orientation patterns of masculinities differ. Here we need to include the intersectional approach in order to recognize and understand the patterns. It is well known that, and variously also verified in research, that processes in which masculinities are negotiated and represented are closely related to success or failing in the education system. And here, Jürgen Budde in Germany did some studies on that. And also, I also want to point out to the studies you might know from Steve Phoenix and Frosch, who have shown in studies of masculinity patterns in British private schools that these are closely linked to efficiency and achievement orientation. At the same time, in the same place, in the same city, I would say, the city of London, masculinity patterns of boys in public schools were completely different. So they were much more connected with having problems with the police, no educational success at all, and also deviant careers. So the same time, the same city, completely different aspects of hegemonic masculinities. Also in a study in Germany, the study from Cornelia Helferich and her team, this study that was conducted in main schools, they were able to show that devaluing educational success as unmanly is a relevant strategy for traditional hegemonic masculinity in educationally deprived context. Also, Olaf Stuwe, our colleague from Germany, wrote, the phenomena of rejection of academic work environment already described from Paul Willis in the 70s for white male students from proletarian milieu in British societies still can be found in Germany in 2014, and it still can be found now. So we need to pay attention to this intersectional perspective when we want to know more about masculinity patterns. Intersectional analysis also shows that subordinated masculinities themselves often act violently to assure themselves of a powerful position in the sense of compensating for masculinity. So the impossibility to participate at the top level of hegemonic masculinity forces boys to develop alternative patterns of masculinity, which may turn out as problematic or can be regarded as deviant. Susanne Spindler, she did biographical interviews with young men in German jails and found out that body and violence-oriented forms of masculinity are emphasized if accepted forms of masculinity are out of reach. And these alternative forms of masculinity often lead into prison. So an in-depth, it was a biographical interview study, an in-depth analysis of their life conditions lead to a deeper understanding of the reasons for the development of such violence-oriented patterns. So she said, while their path of life and education seemed to be rather open at an early age, these conditions narrowed and closed at an older age. The access to education and work increasingly narrowed, which limited their perspectives on life and lead to deviation as a possibility to deal with these limitations. So this is, I think, a very relevant study also. So based on such studies, we see that it's not easy in real life to put this sense of entitlement for dominance in societies into practice. And being focused on such a sense of entitlement for dominance can lead to an endless loop of self-assurance struggles. Men can feel the need to reassert their manhood again and again, sometimes taking risks that may threaten their livelihood or the livelihood of others in their near social environment. The cycle becomes threatening if a fragile self-concept of masculinity is called into question. This is what my colleague Romeo Bisutti said. So the pressure to satisfy certain images of traditional masculinity can subsequently lead to a lack of the development of social skills necessary to deal with oneself, and others. So for example, some boys are unable to build sustainable friendship, unable to build sustainable relationship, or to ask for help, or to admit to the need for help. Some can do it. So we need here, and this is what we did in the ECaRoM project, to integrate the concept of caring masculinity into pedagogical work with the very young children. This can offer a space for boys to approach their own desire and needs and find ways to live these desires and needs without threatening other people's life or their own life. So the concept of caring masculinities has been increasingly addressed in European research and also on European policy level. In the study on the role of men in gender equality, we based the concept of caring masculinity upon Nancy Fraser's model of gender equality. Fraser defined care as a human norm and obligation for all genders. And we said in order to avoid essentialist perspectives and to meet complex realities, we understood the concept in a wide sense. The first thing people think about when they hear caring masculinity is fatherhood. So it's relevant. Fatherhood is relevant. Feeding babies, putting them into to bed, and so this is all relevant. But care encompasses more. It also means emotional support, showing affections, and a deeper kind of attention to the needs of others. And it also means taking care for others, for friends, for people in my social environment, for my colleagues. It means also looking at care occupations, for example. It means what Carla Elliott, a sociologist from Australia, pointed out. She suggested to include also rejection of dominance, rejection of male dominance, and rejection of violence, and the integration of values of care, such as positive emotions, interdependency, and relationality as central features of caring masculinities. Carla Elliott differentiated between care for and care about. So what did she mean? Care for in the sense of care duties that can be carried out by a man, and care about issues are what she described as the affective, emotional aspect of care. So man's rejection of violence and the ability to connect to others are care about issues. This is also a relevant aspect of caring masculinity. It's also the self-care aspect by reducing risk-taking lifestyles. So seen through this lens of this updated masculinity, man can benefit from gender equality because he questions social norms that are not good for men themselves. And I also want to very briefly talk about another beneficiary aspect, the quality of life study conducted in Norway in 2007 from our colleague Øystein Gullvåg Holte, and then also in Poland, 2015, also showed an interesting result, because they showed in this study that the risk for physical punishment is highest in families where the father decides alone, second highest in family where the mother decides alone, and lowest if both equally decide. And this, when both decide equally, they also share resources equally, and this also means sharing of care duties. So I think this is a very relevant benefit from caring masculinity when we can talk about gender-based violence prevention here. Okay, so how did we address caring masculinity in the ECaRoM project? We try to transfer this concept of care into the practical field of education by addressing different aspects. So the individual aspect of self-care, maintaining personal health and well-being, was addressed. Then near social environment aspects, care work necessary to ensure the daily physical, social, and emotional well-being, for example. We addressed the professional aspects, professional care work in the fields of education, health, and social care. We addressed community work. We addressed social engagement as a whole. For example, solidarity for marginalized groups in society. We addressed the gender equality aspect, The ecological aspect means caring for nature and the planet we live on, and also the attitudinal aspect, which means the rejection of violence and the rejection of male privileges in society. So these were the aspects that we tried to address in developing our gender-sensitive material, which will then be shown in the other room, I think. So how did we do it? From a pedagogical approach, we did kind of an adaptation of the trilemma of inclusion from Anne Boger. And I would very briefly introduce this concept before we have a look at the material. We addressed actually 3 angles. The angle of empowerment for care means that a framework should be created in which boys are relieved of traditional masculinity demands and in which care is reinforced and its positive effects are clarified. In practice, this can mean addressing emotions, encouraging children to help and involve them in care activities. On the second angle, the normalization of diverse masculinity, addressing this means addressing equal relationship, addressing vulnerability with boys, addressing the acceptance of gender diversity, of dealing with the unknown. And the third angle is the deconstruction of traditional patterns of masculinity, which means questioning dominance, questioning risk-taking lifestyles, questioning competition, violence, discrimination. So based on the assumption that children are caring human beings, so based on actually Nancy Fraser's concept, the ECaRoM project aimed to strengthen the caring aspect in early childhood education, especially focusing on boys, and developed ways to involve it in everyday interactions. So we attempt to answer the question, how can we transfer such a model of caring masculinity into practice? We attempt to answer the question by sharing the materials we developed today. And I will end my lecture now with showing a karaoke movie in which images and ideas about caring masculinities in everyday life of children are addressed. Alex is My Friend is a song that has been developed from the Austrian team, and Veronica very much participated because she sang the song. You will hear Veronica now singing. It tends to primarily focus on caring for others from the kids' point of view. Through this song, the emotional and caring personal parts of kids become visible, parts that increasingly become excluded in an older age, what we know from studies. So thank you, that's all for the moment. And now let's watch the movie and listen to the song.
Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend because he cares for me. He comforts me. He comforts me because he is my friend and really cares for me.
Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend because he cares for me. He plays with me. He plays with me because he is my friend and really cares for me.
Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend because he cares for me. He helps me. He helps me because he is my friend and really cares for me.
Alex is my friend.
Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend because he cares for me. He listens to me.
He listens to me
Because he is my friend and really cares for me. Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend. Alex is my friend because he cares for me. He shares with me. He shares with me because he is my friend and really cares for me.